If you really think about it, the World Cup is one of those things that feels so normal today that you almost forget how insane it actually is. Like every 4 years, billions of people all over the world from different countries, different languages, and completely different cultures all stop what they're doing to watch the same tournament, to argue about the same moments, to celebrate or suffer together. And it feels like that's just how it's always been. But until 1930, that idea didn't exist at all. There was no global tournament, no agreed upon best team in the world, and honestly, there wasn't even a clear way to figure that out because most countries never played each other. Football was popular for sure, but it was local, regional, and fragmented. And then you have this one man, Jules Rimet, who looks at all of that and starts thinking a little bigger, a little differently, and basically asks a question that feels obvious now, but was anything but at the time. What if we actually brought the world together to compete? Not just amateurs like in the Olympics, but the best players representing their countries, playing for something that actually meant, quote unquote, world champion. And the more you think about that in the context of the 1930s, the more you realize how unrealistic it must have sounded. Because there are no commercial flights, no global broadcasting networks, no infrastructure to support something like this, and even the idea of convincing countries to send teams across the ocean for a brand new tournament, it's a massive gamble. But somehow that idea sticks. FIFA buys into it, and just like that, the World Cup is born, at least in theory. Then comes the next challenge, which is just as big, if not bigger, than creating the tournament itself. Where do you even host something like this? And the answer ends up being Uruguay, which at first glance might seem surprising, but when you look closer, it actually makes perfect sense. Uruguay is one of the strongest football nations in the world at the time, having just won Olympic gold in 1924 and 1928. Which back then was basically the closest thing to a world championship. So from a football standpoint, they're a powerhouse. But what really separates them is their willingness to commit. 1930 marks 100 years of their independence, and they see this as an opportunity to celebrate that on a global stage, so they step forward and say, we'll host it, and we'll pay for everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Travel costs, accommodations, infrastructure, they take on the burden of making this tournament possible. They even build a brand new stadium, the Estadio Centenario, specifically for the event, which becomes this massive symbol of ambition not just for Uruguay, but for the entire idea of the World Cup. And there's also this quiet confidence behind it all, this sense that if they're putting this much into it, they're not just hosting, they're expecting to win. But even with all that in place, the tournament almost falls apart before it even begins. Because getting countries to agree to participate turns out to be incredibly difficult. Today, teams hop on a plane, fly across the world in a matter of hours, and arrive ready to compete. But in 1930, if you're an European team, getting to Uruguay means committing to a journey across the Atlantic that takes weeks. Not days, weeks. And these players aren't full-time professionals in the way we think of them today. Many of them had jobs, different responsibilities, families back at home, so asking them to leave everything behind for that long, for a tournament that's never even happened before, is a tough sell. So when FIFA sends out invitations, most countries decline. England doesn't even consider it. Germany stays home, Italy stays home, Spain stays home, Japan and Thailand withdraw, Egypt accepts but misses their ship. And suddenly this World Cup is at risk of becoming a very small, very regional event. But then a handful of European teams decide to take the leap. France, Belgium, Romania, and Yugoslavia. And the way they get there ends up becoming one of the most unique parts of this entire story. They all travel together on a ship, the SS Conte Verde, spending weeks crossing the ocean side by side, training on deck, sharing meals, living in close quarters, all while knowing that when they arrive, they'll be competing against each other. And there's something about that feels so different from the modern game. Something almost raw and human, where the lines between opponents and teammates blur before the tournament even begins. Eventually, 13 teams make it to Uruguay, which by today's standards feels incredibly small, but at the time it's enough to make history. There are no qualifiers, no rankings, no established format. FIFA is essentially figuring things out as they go, and the tournament itself feels less like a polished event and more like an experiment unfolding in real time. And when it finally begins on July 13th, 1930, there's no grand sense of legacy, no overwhelming global attention, just a group of teams stepping onto the field to see what happens. One of the first matches features France and Mexico, and during that game, a player named Lucien Laurent scores a goal. At that time, it's just a goal, nothing more, but looking back, it becomes the first goal ever scored in World Cup history, which is one of those moments that reminds you of how often history is happening without anyone even realizing it. Okay, so let's talk about World Cup format. Once the 1930 World Cup actually kicks off in Uruguay, the format itself is actually much simpler than what we're used to today. Almost surprisingly so when you look back at it. There were 13 teams in total, and instead of a long knockout bracket or the modern group and elimination structure, FIFA split them into just 4 groups. 1 group of 4 teams and 3 groups of 3 teams. Each team played the others in their group once, and the scoring system was straightforward. 2 points for a win, 1 for a draw, and 0 for a loss. No goal differential drama, no complex tiebreaker scenarios like we have today. Just finish top of your group or go home. And when you look at how the groups actually played out, a few clear stories start to emerge. In Group 1 was Argentina, who dominated, looking sharp and confident from the start, and finishing ahead of Chile, France, and Mexico. In Group 2, it was Yugoslavia, who impressed, managing to outperform Brazil and Bolivia to win the group. Group 3 belonged to the hosts, Uruguay, who slowly built into their tournament and topped their group ahead of Romania and Peru. And then, in Group 4, it was the United States who surprised a lot of people, winning their group ahead of Paraguay and Belgium after a strong start that few expected from them. So that sets up your Final 4. Argentina, Uruguay, Yugoslavia, and the United States. And from there, the tournament shifts into a straight knockout format. Just 2 semifinals, no second chances, no safety net. The first semifinal sees Argentina absolutely take control against the United States, winning 6-1 in a match that on paper looks one-sided. But it still matters historically because the US had actually impressed in their group stage to even reach that point. But Argentina were just on another level, moving the ball better, finishing chances more clearly, and essentially putting the game away early before it could really become competitive. The second semi-final between Uruguay and Yugoslavia is where things start to feel more intense. Yugoslavia actually shocks Uruguay early by scoring first, which briefly creates the sense that maybe, just maybe, the hosts could be under real pressure here. But that moment doesn't last very long. Uruguay responds almost immediately and then completely take over the match, scoring goal after goal until it ends 6-1. Same result as the other game, a result that looks comfortable on paper but carries a bit more tension underneath it, especially considering Uruguay were expected to win the whole tournament from the beginning. And so that sets up the final everyone almost anticipated from the start: Uruguay versus Argentina. 2 South American rivals meeting on the biggest stage imaginable at the time. The atmosphere is massive, the pressure is enormous, and even the build-up has this strange tension to it because both teams are confident, both believe they can win, and neither is willing to give an inch. So much so that they actually couldn't agree on which ball to use for the match, ending up with a compromise where Argentina's ball was used in the first half and Uruguay's in the second. A side note here, this was actually the only World Cup final contested by 2 Spanish-speaking nations. The match itself reflects that intensity. Argentina actually starts stronger and managed to take a 2-1 lead going into halftime, which suddenly puts Uruguay in a position they hadn't really been in all tournament, chasing the game at home in front of a massive crowd expecting them to win. But in the second half, everything shifts. Uruguay come out with more urgency, more physicality, more belief, and slowly but surely they turn the match around, equalizing first, then taking the lead, and eventually pulling away completely. By the end, they win 4-2, completing the comeback and becoming the first ever World Cup champions. And when a final whistle blows, it's not just a victory in a football match, it's the confirmation that this entire experiment worked. Because everything about this first World Cup could have gone wrong. Teams might not have shown up, the format could have failed, the entire concept might have fallen apart under its own weight. But a tournament that started as an ambitious idea with uncertain participation, long ocean journeys, and barely any structure, ends with a real champion, a real final, and a real sense that something permanent has been created. The World Cup wasn't just an idea anymore. It was real, and what makes 1930 so fascinating is how different it feels compared to a modern game. There were no substitutions, no yellow cards, no red cards, minimal structure, and so much of it relies on adaptation and improvisation. Even the trophy itself doesn't carry the iconic identity we associate with the World Cup today. It was later to be named after Jules Rimet, the man who made all of this possible. But maybe the most incredible part is that the players, the coaches, the fans, none of them fully understand what they're part of in that moment. They're just playing, competing, experiencing something new. And yet, what they're actually doing is laying the foundation for the biggest sporting event the world has ever seen. From 13 teams in Uruguay to a tournament watched by billions.